Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation Cracks. Vince Riley had built his life like a fortress, methodical, impenetrable, and designed to withstand any siege. 22 years as a Marine Corps intelligence officer had taught him that survival depended on three things: preparation, observation, and the willingness to do what others couldn't. At 51, his steel-gray eyes still carried the weight of classified operations that would never see declassification, and his hands bore scars from interrogations he'd never discuss. Diana had been his anchor when he returned from his final deployment in Afghanistan. Beautiful, intelligent, and seemingly devoted, she'd given him Alex, a son who inherited Vince's analytical mind and Diana's striking features. For 15 years, their marriage had been his one sanctuary, the single place where Vincent Riley, the husband, existed separate from the man who'd once made terrorists disappear in Syrian safe houses. Their suburban Phoenix home reflected this careful balance. Diana's art studio occupied the converted garage, filled with half-finished paintings and sculptures that generated modest income from local galleries. Alex, now 16, excelled in advanced mathematics and computer programming, showing the same methodical precision that defined his father. Vince ran a private security consulting firm, officially advising corporations on threat assessment while unofficially handling problems that required his particular skill set. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday evening in March. Vince had returned early from a consultation in Las Vegas, finding Diana's car gone and Alex practicing violin in his room. Nothing unusual. Diana often attended evening art classes or visited galleries. But something felt wrong. The house carried an unfamiliar energy, like the moment before an ambush when every instinct screams danger. He found Diana's phone charging in their bedroom, forgotten in her rush. The screen displayed a message notification from T that made his blood stop moving. "Can't wait to be inside you again. Tomorrow night, same place. Love you." Vincent stared at the screen for 30 seconds, his breathing controlled and steady. In Afghanistan, he'd once sat motionless for 8 hours waiting for the perfect shot on a Taliban commander. Patience was his greatest weapon, and rage was a luxury he'd never allowed himself. He photographed the message, deleted it, and replaced the phone exactly where he'd found it. Then he went to his study and began what would become the most important operation of his life. Diana returned at 11:30, claiming her art class had run late. She kissed his cheek with lips that tasted faintly of wine and lies, her usual warmth replaced by something performative. Vince watched her prepare for bed, noting the new lingerie she'd never worn for him, the way she avoided his eyes, the practiced casualness of her deception. "How was Las Vegas?" she asked, settling into bed beside him. "Productive," he replied, his voice carrying none of the turmoil beneath. "Picked up a new client. High-profile executive who's been receiving death threats." Diana nodded absently, already turning away. "That's good. We could use the money with Alex starting college applications soon." As she drifted toward sleep, Vince stared at the ceiling and began planning. He thought about the years he'd spent tracking insurgents through the Hindu Kush, how every successful mission began with understanding the enemy completely. Diana had become the enemy, not just because she'd betrayed him, but because she'd done it with such calculated dishonesty, bringing another man into the life they'd built around their son. The next morning, Vince activated dormant skills he'd hoped never to use again. While Diana taught her morning yoga class, he installed microscopic cameras throughout their home, devices so advanced they were invisible even to trained eyes. He placed tracking software on her phone and laptop and hired Tommy Kovac, a former CIA surveillance specialist who now ran a private investigation firm in Scottsdale. By evening, Vince knew Diana's lover was Trevor Banks, a 45-year-old real estate developer who specialized in luxury resorts. Banks was married to Rebecca, a pediatric surgeon, with twin daughters attending private school. He drove a silver Porsche Cayenne and had been seeing Diana for 8 months, based on the financial records Vince accessed through methods that would have been illegal if anyone could prove he'd used them. Diana left for her gallery opening at 7:30, wearing the black dress Vince had bought her for their anniversary. He watched from his study as she drove to the Phoenician resort, where Banks had reserved a suite under the name T. Morrison. Tommy's surveillance team captured everything. Their passionate embrace in the lobby, The way Diana's face lit up with genuine happiness Vince hadn't seen in years, their disappearance into the elevator like lovers in a romance novel. For 3 hours, Vince sat in his darkened study, studying photographs and financial records while his wife gave herself to another man. Alex practiced piano downstairs, the classical melody providing an ironic soundtrack to the death of everything Vince had thought was real. When Diana returned at 11:45, claiming the gallery event had been inspiring, Vince was waiting in bed with a business magazine. She kissed him again with the same rehearsed affection, and he responded with equal performance, already seeing her as an enemy operative who'd infiltrated his life. "I love you," she whispered, settling against his chest. "I love you too," he replied, the words turning to ash in his mouth. As Diana slept beside him, Vince began composing the first phase of an operation that would destroy 2 families with surgical precision. He'd learned in the Marines that the most effective attacks came from directions the enemy never suspected, using their own strengths against them. Diana and Trevor thought they were clever, careful, untouchable. They were about to discover what happened when you betrayed a man who'd spent 2 decades perfecting the art of making problems disappear permanently. Chapter 2. The Hunter's Research. Vincent spent the following weeks conducting surveillance that would have impressed his former CIA colleagues. Every morning, he kissed Diana goodbye with the warmth of a devoted husband, then transformed into something far more dangerous. His security consulting firm provided perfect cover for extended absences, allowing him to shadow his wife and her lover with professional thoroughness. Trevor Banks lived in a glass-walled mansion in Paradise Valley, complete with infinity pool and 3-car garage housing his Porsche, a vintage Corvette, and Rebecca's Mercedes. Rebecca Banks worked 60-hour weeks at Phoenix Children's Hospital, often sleeping at the hospital during complex surgeries. Their 16-year-old daughters, Emma and Sophia, attended Brophy College Preparatory and spent most afternoons at tennis lessons or violin practice. The Banks family portrait revealed everything Vince needed to know about Trevor's vulnerabilities. Here was a man who'd built his identity around success, control, and the admiration of others. His real estate empire depended on reputation, city council connections, and a carefully cultivated image as a devoted family man who donated generously to children's charities. Diana and Trevor's affair followed a predictable pattern. Tuesday afternoons at the Phoenician, Thursday evenings at Trevor's downtown loft, and occasional weekend trips when Rebecca worked emergency surgeries. They'd become sloppy in their confidence, texting constantly and meeting for coffee at public places where Vince's surveillance team documented every intimate moment. But it was Alex who provided the most devastating intelligence. Vince had noticed his son's increasing withdrawal, shorter responses, avoided eye contact, hours spent alone in his room beyond normal teenage behavior. One evening in April, while Diana attended another art class, Vince found Alex in the kitchen making a late-night snack. "Dad, can I ask you something?" Alex's voice carried unusual hesitation. "Always. If someone you trusted was lying to you about something important, would you want to know?" The question hit Vince like a sniper's bullet. His son had inherited more than his analytical mind. Alex had also developed the ability to see through deception that made Vince so effective in intelligence work. "Depends on the situation," Vince replied carefully. "But generally, I believe people deserve the truth, especially from those they love." Alex nodded slowly, wrestling with something that clearly tormented him. What if telling the truth would hurt people you care about? Vince set down his coffee and looked directly at his son. "Alex, whatever you're carrying, you don't have to carry it alone." For a moment, Alex seemed on the verge of confession. Then his phone buzzed with a text from Diana. "Running late tonight. Don't wait up. Love you both." The irony of the message arriving at that exact moment wasn't lost on either of them. Alex's face hardened with the same expression Vince recognized from his own mirror. The look of someone who'd just had their faith shattered. "She's been lying for a long time, hasn't she?" Alex said quietly. "What have you seen?" "Everything." Alex's voice carried a bitterness no 16-year-old should possess. "The phone calls, the new clothes, the way she smiles when she texts. I followed her once. I saw them together." Vince felt something cold settle in his chest. His son, his innocent, brilliant son, had been forced to carry the weight of his mother's betrayal alone. "How long have you known?" 6 months. Maybe longer." Alex's hands trembled slightly. I kept thinking she'd stop, that she'd remember she had a family who loved her. The revelation changed everything. This wasn't just about Diana's infidelity. She damaged their son with her selfishness, forcing Alex to live with knowledge that was poisoning him from within. Any possibility of forgiveness died in that moment. "What do you want to do?" Vince asked. Alex met his father's eyes with a resolve that was frightening in its intensity. "I want her to pay for what she's done to us." That night, Vince expanded his operation to include a new objective: protecting Alex from the psychological warfare he was about to unleash. His son would need to be carefully managed through what was coming, guided toward healing rather than the destructive rage that Vince felt burning in his own chest. He also began researching Trevor Banks with the intensity he'd once reserved for high-value targets. Banks's real estate empire was built on leveraged investments and political connections that wouldn't survive public scrutiny. He'd used city council relationships to secure exclusive development rights, often at the expense of historic neighborhoods and low-income communities. More importantly, Trevor Banks was a man who'd never faced real consequences for his actions. Born into wealth, educated at private schools, handed opportunities that others would kill for, he'd lived an insulated life where charm and money solved every problem. He had no idea what was about to hit him. By May, Vince had assembled a complete psychological profile of both targets. Diana craved validation and excitement that her stable marriage couldn't provide. She saw Trevor as sophisticated, passionate, willing to risk everything for love. The affair wasn't just physical. She was genuinely falling in love with a man who represented everything she felt was missing from her life. Trevor, meanwhile, was a classic narcissist who collected conquests to feed his ego. Married women were particularly appealing because they posed minimal threat to his primary life while providing maximum validation. He genuinely believed he was special enough to deserve multiple relationships, that rules applying to other people didn't apply to him. Neither Diana nor Trevor understood they were dealing with someone who'd spent 2 decades studying human nature at its most vulnerable. They saw Vincent Riley as a stable, predictable husband who would never suspect his wife's infidelity. They had no idea they were being hunted by someone who'd once tracked terrorist leaders through crowds of thousands. On a warm Thursday evening in May, Vince received the intelligence that would trigger the next phase of his operation. Tommy Kovac called with news that would have destroyed a lesser man. Diana was pregnant. The baby wasn't his. Chapter 3. The Trap begins. The pregnancy revelation hit Vincent with the force of an IED blast. For 24 hours, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of Diana's betrayal. Not just the affair, but the biological warfare she'd unleashed on their family. She was carrying another man's child while lying in the bed she shared with her husband, kissing goodnight the son who already suspected her deception. But where another man might have collapsed or exploded in rage, Vincent channeled his fury into something far more dangerous: absolute calculation. Diana had declared war on everything he'd built. Now she would learn what happened when you brought a knife to a gunfight against someone who'd perfected the art of total destruction. The first phase required Diana and Trevor to believe they were safe. Vincent became the perfect husband, attentive without being suspicious, supportive without being clingy. When Diana announced her pregnancy 3 weeks later, his performance was worthy of an Academy Award. "Are you serious?" He lifted her in a spin that looked joyful to anyone watching, including Alex, who stood in the kitchen doorway with an expression of pure disgust. "This is incredible news." Diana's smile faltered for just a moment. She knew the timeline made Vince's parentage questionable, but she recovered quickly, allowing herself to believe her husband was too trusting to do the math. "I know we weren't trying, but this is perfect timing," Vince interrupted, kissing her forehead. "Alex will be in college soon. We'll have time to focus on a new baby." That evening, after Diana called Trevor to share their wonderful news, Vince initiated the next phase. He'd spent weeks infiltrating Trevor's world through business connections, establishing himself as a potential investor in Banks Development's latest project, a luxury resort in Sedona that required significant private funding. The introduction came through Marcus Webb, a former Delta Force operator who now ran security for several high-profile real estate developers. Marcus owed Vince his life from an operation in Iraq and was happy to arrange a meeting between Vincent Reynolds, a wealthy former defense contractor looking to diversify his investments, and Trevor Banks. Vincent Reynolds existed only on paper, a perfectly constructed identity backed by shell companies, offshore accounts, and a business history that would impress any background check. He was everything Trevor Banks aspired to be: ruthlessly successful, mysteriously wealthy, and completely unattached to the mundane concerns of ordinary people. Their first meeting took place at Trevor's downtown office, a glass-walled monument to ego decorated with awards, photographs with politicians, and architectural models of his various developments. Trevor wore a $15,000 watch and kept glancing at his phone, probably texting Diana between discussing investment opportunities. "The Sedona project is my masterpiece," Trevor explained, gesturing to a scale model of a resort that would have been beautiful if it weren't built on a foundation of stolen happiness. 90 luxury suites, world-class spa, championship golf course. We're talking about creating the Southwest's premier destination for discerning travelers. Vincent studied the model with professional interest. "Impressive. What's your timeline for completion?" 18 months from groundbreaking. "We've already secured permits and preliminary financing, but we're looking for the right investor, someone who appreciates quality and isn't afraid of ambitious projects." "I appreciate both," Vincent replied, allowing just enough enigmatic authority to enter his voice. "I also appreciate discretion. My business interests require privacy." Trevor's eyes lit up with the greed that would ultimately destroy him. Here was exactly the kind of investor he needed: wealthy, private, and apparently unconcerned with traditional oversight. Over the following weeks, Vincent Reynolds became Trevor's new best friend. They met for drinks at exclusive clubs, played golf at courses where membership cost more than most people's annual salary, and discussed business deals worth millions of dollars. Trevor was so eager to impress his mysterious new investor that he shared details about his personal life, including his affair with an amazing woman who made him feel alive for the first time in years. Vincent listened to descriptions of his wife's body, her passion, her willingness to do things Rebecca would never consider. He nodded sympathetically when Trevor complained about the complications of maintaining two relationships, offering advice on discretion and emotional management that came from decades of compartmentalizing classified operations. "The key is keeping both women happy without either one feeling neglected," Vincent said during a particularly revealing conversation at the Arizona Country Club. "It requires discipline and careful planning." "Exactly," Trevor leaned forward conspiratorially. "Diana, that's her name. She's incredible. Smart, beautiful, passionate. But she's married to this boring security consultant who has no idea what kind of woman he's married to. Sounds like a man who doesn't deserve her. That's what I keep telling her. She's wasted on someone so ordinary." Vincent sipped his whiskey and smiled. Perhaps she'll realize that soon enough. By July, Trevor had accepted a $12 million investment from Vincent Reynolds for the Sedona resort, signed contracts that gave his mysterious partner significant oversight authority, and begun treating Diana to increasingly expensive gifts funded by money that ultimately came from her husband's carefully constructed shell companies. The irony was perfect. Trevor was using Vincent's money to buy presents for Vincent's wife, all while bragging about cuckolding a man he considered pathetically inferior. Meanwhile, Diana was falling deeper in love with a man whose newfound generosity came from her husband's bank account. But the financial manipulation was just the beginning. Vincent had studied his target's weaknesses with clinical precision, and he'd identified the perfect pressure points to begin their systematic destruction. Trevor's greatest vulnerability wasn't financial, it was his ego. Everything he'd achieved depended on maintaining his image as successful, powerful, untouchable. Vincent began subtly undermining that image by introducing Trevor to increasingly questionable business associates, each one designed to create legal complications that would eventually destroy his reputation. Diana's weakness was her romantic idealization of her affair. She'd convinced herself that her relationship with Trevor was a great love story, tragic in its impossibility, but pure in its passion. Vincent began systematically destroying that fantasy by ensuring Diana discovered evidence of Trevor's other affairs, because of course there were others. The revelation came through a carefully orchestrated accident in late July. Vincent arranged for Diana to see Trevor with another woman at a restaurant where they thought they wouldn't be recognized. The woman was actually Lisa Chun, an undercover investigator on Vincent's payroll who specialized in honey trap operations. Diana's devastation was immediate and complete. She confronted Trevor, who initially denied everything before admitting to a meaningless fling that meant nothing compared to his feelings for her. But the damage was done. The perfect love story had revealed itself as just another sordid affair. What Diana didn't know was that her pain was being carefully documented. Vincent had cameras recording her tears, microphones capturing her arguments with Trevor, financial records showing every purchase made with emotion-driven irrationality. He was building a case that would destroy her credibility in any future legal proceeding, especially regarding custody of Alex. By August, both targets were beginning to experience the stress fractures that would eventually bring down their entire lives. Trevor was dealing with increasingly aggressive auditors asking questions about his business practices, while Diana was discovering that her perfect lover was just another selfish man who put his own needs first. Neither of them suspected that their growing problems were connected, or that the boring security consultant they dismissed as irrelevant was orchestrating their destruction with the precision of a military operation. But Vincent's real masterpiece was still to come. Everything so far had been preparation, softening the targets, gathering intelligence, positioning assets. The actual revenge would be far more brutal than anything they could imagine. As summer ended, Vincent began planning the endgame that would bring both Diana and Trevor to their knees simultaneously, destroying not just their relationship, but everything they valued in their separate lives. He'd learned their weaknesses, exploited their vulnerabilities, and positioned himself to strike from directions they'd never see coming. The man who'd once made terrorists disappear in Afghan caves was about to remind two suburban cheaters why betraying a professional killer was the last mistake they'd ever make. Chapter 4: Web of Deception. Vincent's surveillance network had evolved into something that would have impressed his former NSA contacts. Every aspect of Diana and Trevor's lives was now under constant observation through a combination of electronic monitoring, human assets, and psychological manipulation. They lived in a fishbowl, unaware that every conversation, every emotion, every secret was being cataloged by a man they both underestimated. September brought new developments that accelerated Vincent's timeline. Diana's pregnancy was showing, and she'd begun making increasingly desperate demands on Trevor to leave his wife. Their affair, once conducted with careful discretion, was becoming messy and emotional as Diana realized that her lover's promises about their future together were empty platitudes designed to keep her satisfied with scraps. Trevor, meanwhile, was dealing with mounting pressure from multiple directions. The investment money from Vincent Reynolds came with oversight requirements that were beginning to reveal irregularities in his business practices. City planning officials were asking uncomfortable questions about permit approvals that seemed unusually favorable to Banks' development. Most dangerously, Rebecca was beginning to notice her husband's increasing absence and emotional distance. Vincent watched both targets spiral while maintaining his carefully constructed personas. As Vincent Riley, he was the supportive husband helping his wife through a difficult pregnancy, even accompanying her to doctor's appointments where he smiled lovingly while getting confirmation that the baby's due date made his paternity biologically impossible. As Vincent Reynolds, he was the mysterious investor whose questions were making Trevor increasingly paranoid about potential fraud investigations. The real breakthrough came when Alex provided intelligence that changed everything. "Dad, I need to tell you something," Alex said one evening in mid-September. They were in Vincent's study, allegedly working on college application essays, but Vincent could see his son struggling with something more important than academic deadlines. "I'm listening." "Mom's lover, Trevor, he's been asking her questions about you. About your work, your clients, your income." Alex's voice carried the careful precision he'd inherited from his father. "She thinks he's just curious, but I think he's planning something." Vincent felt the familiar chill that preceded combat operations. "What kind of questions?" "Specific stuff. About your consulting contracts, whether you have security clearances, what kind of cases you work on. Last week, I heard him asking if you keep files at home." The implications were staggering. Trevor Banks wasn't just stealing Vincent's wife. He was conducting intelligence gathering that suggested a far more sophisticated betrayal than a simple affair. Either Trevor was planning to use Vincent's business information for his own benefit, or he was working with someone who needed access to Vincent's client list. That night, Vincent activated surveillance protocols he'd hoped never to use. Within hours, he had confirmation that Trevor was indeed more than a cheating real estate developer. He was connected to a network of criminal enterprises that used legitimate businesses to launder money from weapons trafficking, human smuggling, and narcotics distribution. The revelation recontextualized everything. Diana wasn't just cheating with a successful businessman. She was unknowingly involved with someone whose criminal activities posed a direct threat to Vincent's family. Several of Vincent's consulting clients were federal agencies conducting classified operations against the same networks that Trevor was helping finance. By October, Vincent had assembled a complete picture of Trevor's criminal enterprise. Bank's development was a front operation that converted illegal profits into legitimate real estate investments. Trevor's political connections weren't just about favorable permits. They were about protection from law enforcement scrutiny. His affair with Diana had begun as genuine attraction, but evolved into something more calculating when he realized her husband's connections could provide valuable intelligence. Vincent's response was swift and merciless. He activated contacts within federal law enforcement, providing anonymous tips that led to investigations into Trevor's money laundering operations. Simultaneously, he began feeding false information to Diana about his classified contracts, ensuring that any intelligence Trevor gathered would be not only useless but actively harmful to his criminal associates. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Trevor was using Diana to spy on a man who was now using their relationship to feed misinformation directly to his criminal network. Every question Trevor asked, every detail Diana provided, was carefully crafted to lead law enforcement closer to Trevor's associates, while making Vincent appear to be conducting exactly the kind of operations that would interest criminal enterprises. Diana, caught between her lover's increasing demands for information and her husband's growing secrecy about his work, began experiencing stress that manifested in ways Vincent found deeply satisfying. She was gaining weight beyond normal pregnancy expectations, sleeping poorly, and snapping at Alex with increasing frequency. The guilt of betraying her family was combining with the pressure of serving as an unwitting intelligence asset to create exactly the kind of psychological breakdown Vincent had learned to exploit during interrogations. But Vincent's most devastating move was still to come. Through his Vincent Reynolds persona, he'd gained access to Trevor's most sensitive financial records, including offshore accounts and shell company structures. What he found was evidence of a criminal enterprise worth over $50 million, information that would not only destroy Trevor, but implicate dozens of associates in a conspiracy that spanned multiple states. In late October, Vincent made a decision that would have seemed insanely reckless to anyone who didn't understand his capabilities. He was going to turn Trevor Banks into an unwitting asset against his own criminal network, using the man's affair with Diana as leverage to force cooperation with federal law enforcement. The operation began with a carefully staged confrontation. Vincent, as Vincent Reynolds, arranged to meet Trevor at his downtown office, ostensibly to discuss expanding their investment partnership. But instead of talking business, Vincent placed a thick folder on Trevor's desk containing photographs, financial records, and communications that proved Trevor's criminal activities in devastating detail. "I know who you really are," Vincent said quietly, watching the blood drain from Trevor's face. "I know about the money laundering, the criminal associates, the offshore accounts. I know about Diana Riley." Trevor's attempt at denial died when Vincent produced photographs of him with Diana, along with transcripts of conversations where Trevor had asked her about her husband's classified work. "You have two choices," Vincent continued. "You can cooperate with the federal investigation that's about to destroy your criminal network, or you can go to prison for the rest of your life along with everyone you've ever worked with." Trevor's response was exactly what Vincent had expected from a criminal who'd lived his entire life believing he was untouchable. "You can't prove anything," Trevor said, but his voice shook with the realization that his carefully constructed world was collapsing. "Even if you could, I have connections. People who would be very interested to know that Vincent Reynolds is actually Vincent Riley, the man whose wife I've been fucking for over a year." Vincent smiled with genuine amusement. "Please, make those calls. I'd love to see what happens when your criminal associates learn that you've been sleeping with a federal contractor's wife. while feeding information to someone who's been recording every conversation, photographing every meeting, and documenting every crime you've committed since we met. The truth hit Trevor like a physical blow. Vincent Reynolds wasn't just a mysterious investor. He was Vincent Riley, and the entire relationship had been an elaborate sting operation conducted by a man whose wife Trevor had betrayed. Diana has no idea what kind of man she married, Vincent said, standing to leave. She thinks she's in love with you. But you're about to discover what happens when you threaten someone who spent 20 years perfecting the art of making problems disappear permanently. Trevor's face went white. You're going to kill me. Kill you? Vincent laughed, a sound completely devoid of warmth. That would be merciful. I'm going to destroy everything you've ever cared about, turn you into a federal informant against your own people, and ensure that every day for the rest of your miserable life. You remember that you brought this on yourself by thinking you could steal from a man who's forgotten more about warfare than you'll ever learn about anything. As Vincent walked toward the door, Trevor made the mistake that would seal his fate. Diana's carrying my baby, he said desperately. If you destroy me, you destroy her too. Vincent turned back with an expression that made Trevor understand, for the first time, that he was dealing with someone genuinely dangerous. Diana stopped being my concern the moment she chose you over her family, Vincent replied. The baby isn't my responsibility either. But you're about to learn what happens when you threaten a man's son with your criminal activities. Alex doesn't deserve to pay for his mother's choices or your greed. That night, Vincent began the final phase of an operation that would leave no survivors among his enemies while protecting the only person who still mattered to him, his son, who'd shown loyalty in the face of betrayal and deserved better than the family that had failed him. The end game would be brutal, permanent, and absolutely final. Chapter 5. The Father's Warning. Robert Riley's death in early November changed everything. Vincent's father had been a decorated Vietnam veteran who'd taught his son that honor wasn't negotiable and betrayal demanded consequences. He'd been fighting pancreatic cancer for 6 months, a battle he'd hidden from most of the family to avoid what he called emotional theatrics. Vincent knew his father was dying. Robert had told him privately, man to man, with the straightforward honesty that defined their relationship. What Vincent didn't know was that his father had discovered Diana's affair and taken action to protect his son and grandson from the chaos he saw coming. The funeral was held on a gray Tuesday that matched Vincent's mood. Diana played the grieving daughter-in-law perfectly, clutching Vincent's arm while tears streamed down her face. She was 5 months pregnant now, showing enough that several relatives commented on how Robert would have loved to meet another grandchild. Each comment was a knife twist that Vincent endured with the stoicism his father had taught him. Alex stood beside his father throughout the service, but Vincent could see his son's attention wasn't on the eulogies. Alex was watching the crowd with the same analytical intensity Vincent used during threat assessments, noting who attended, how they behaved, who seemed out of place. After the burial, as family members gathered at Robert's house for the traditional meal, Vincent's mother Helen pulled him aside with an urgency that immediately triggered his professional instincts. "Vincent, I need to talk to you privately," she said, her voice shaking with something beyond grief. "About your father's last few days." They walked to Robert's study, a room that had always been off-limits during Vincent's childhood. Helen closed the door and turned to face her son with eyes that carried a fear Vincent had never seen before. "Your wife visited him the night before he died," Helen said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "She came alone, said she needed to tell him something important. They talked for over an hour. When she left, your father was different, agitated, angry in a way I hadn't seen since Vietnam." Vincent felt the familiar combat alertness flooding his system. "What did they talk about?" "I don't know. Robert wouldn't tell me. But after she left, he made phone calls. Private calls where he spoke in that voice he used during the war. Cold, professional, dangerous. Then he wrote letters. 3 of them. He made me promise to give them to you after the funeral." Helen retrieved an envelope from Robert's desk. Vincent recognized his father's handwriting immediately, the precise script of a man who'd learned that unclear communication could get people killed. The first letter was addressed to Vincent. "Son, by the time you read this, you'll know what Diana has done to your family. I discovered her affair 3 weeks ago, along with evidence that her lover is involved in criminal activities that pose a direct threat to you and Alex. I've taken steps to ensure you have the information necessary to protect your family and seek appropriate justice. The other letters contain details that will help you finish what I've started. Your mother doesn't know the specifics. Protect her from what's coming. Your father who loves you. The second letter contained intelligence that made Vincent's blood run cold. Robert had used his own military connections to investigate Trevor Banks, discovering links to international arms trafficking that went far beyond simple money laundering. Trevor wasn't just a criminal. He was part of a network that supplied weapons to terrorist organizations Vincent had spent years hunting. The third letter was the most devastating. Vincent, Diana knows about your classified work with federal agencies. She's been passing information to Banks, who's been sharing it with associates connected to Syrian weapons smuggling operations. Your cover has been compromised. Protect Alex and eliminate the threat permanently. This is a direct order from your commanding officer. Vincent read the letters twice, then handed them to his mother. Her face went ashen as she absorbed the implications. Your father was going to tell you everything, Helen said quietly. He was planning to survive long enough to help you handle this situation. But the stress of what he'd discovered, it accelerated the cancer. Diana killed him as surely as if she'd put a gun to his head. Before Vincent could respond, footsteps in the hallway announced someone approaching the study. Alex appeared in the doorway, his face grim with determination that reminded Vincent powerfully of Robert. Dad, you need to hide, Alex said urgently. Before they come. Who's coming, Alex? Trevor's people. I've been monitoring his communications for weeks. Alex's voice carried the steady calm of someone delivering a professional briefing. He knows you're Vincent Reynolds. He knows about the federal investigation. He's decided to eliminate the threat before you can testify. As if summoned by Alex's warning, the sound of vehicles pulling into the driveway echoed through the house. Vincent moved to the window and saw two black SUVs with government plates, but he recognized the vehicles from surveillance photos. They belonged to Trevor's criminal associates, likely armed and definitely dangerous. How long do we have? Vincent asked. Maybe 2 minutes before they position themselves around the house, Alex replied. Grandma, is there another way out? Helen pointed to a door Vincent hadn't noticed, built into the wall paneling so seamlessly it was nearly invisible. Your father installed this during the Cold War. It leads to the garage. As Vincent moved toward the hidden door, Alex grabbed his arm. Dad, there's something else. Mom told Trevor about your safe room at home. She gave him the security codes, blueprints of the house, everything. She thinks she's helping him protect himself from what she calls your government connections. The revelation that Diana had betrayed their family's most sensitive security arrangements was the final confirmation Vincent needed. She wasn't just cheating. She was actively working with criminals to neutralize the threat she perceived her husband to represent. What's the plan? Alex asked, his voice steady despite the danger closing in around them. Vincent looked at his son, 16 years old, and already demonstrating the kind of courage and loyalty that defined the Riley men. In that moment, he made a decision that would determine the rest of both their lives. We're going to disappear, Vincent said quietly. Your mother has chosen her side. Now we choose ours. As they prepared to leave through Robert's escape route, Vincent heard Diana's voice from the main house, greeting the men who'd come to kill her husband. She was introducing them to family members, playing the role of innocent widow while facilitating what she believed would be Vincent's capture. She doesn't know they're here to kill you, Alex said, reading his father's expression. She thinks they're federal agents who are going to arrest you for something. Trevor convinced her that you're the criminal in this situation. Vincent paused at the threshold of the hidden door. Outside, Diana was pregnant with another man's child while helping that man's criminal associates position themselves to murder her husband. Inside, Alex was risking his life to warn his father about threats he'd discovered through his own investigation. The choice between them wasn't even close. Your grandfather was right, Vincent said as they slipped into the darkness of Robert's garage. This is war. And in war, you protect your allies and eliminate your enemies without mercy or hesitation. As they drove away from his father's house, Vincent began implementing the final phase of an operation that would leave Diana, Trevor, and their criminal associates destroyed beyond any possibility of recovery. But more importantly, he was beginning a new life with the one person who'd remained loyal when everything else fell apart. Alex had chosen to stand with his father. Now Vincent would show him what that loyalty was worth, and what happened to people who made the mistake of threatening the Riley family. The end game was about to begin, and there would be no survivors among his enemies. Chapter 6. The Reckoning Begins. Vincent and Alex spent their first night as fugitives in a safe house that officially didn't exist, a property Vincent had purchased years earlier under an identity so deeply buried that even federal agencies would struggle to trace it. Located in the desert outside Flagstaff, the house was equipped with military-grade communications equipment, weapons that could stop a small army, and surveillance technology that covered a 5-mile radius. As Alex explored their temporary home with the fascination of someone discovering his father's secret life, Vincent activated protocols he'd hoped never to use. Within hours, he'd established contact with former teammates scattered across 3 continents, each one owing Vincent debts that transcended money or favors. "Dad, this place is incredible," Alex said, examining a computer system that looked like mission control for a space launch. "How long have you been preparing for something like this?" "Since the day you were born," Vincent replied honestly. "I've always known that my past might catch up with our family. I just never expected the threat to come from inside our house." The next morning brought confirmation of what they'd escaped. Tommy Kovac called with news that Vincent's home had been raided by armed men claiming to be federal agents. Diana had let them in, believing they were there to arrest her husband for unspecified crimes against national security. Instead, they'd torn the house apart looking for evidence that didn't exist, then disappeared when real federal agents arrived to investigate reports of suspicious activity. "Diana's playing the confused wife perfectly," Tommy reported, "telling everyone that you've been acting strangely, that she's worried about your mental health since your father's death. She's even suggested that you might have kidnapped Alex." Vincent felt a cold satisfaction settling in his chest. Diana was following exactly the script he'd expected, portraying herself as an innocent victim of her husband's apparent psychological breakdown, while secretly hoping that Trevor's people had eliminated the threat to their relationship. What about Trevor? Disappeared. His office is closed, his phones are disconnected, and Rebecca filed a missing person report yesterday. But here's the interesting part. She also filed for emergency divorce and froze all their joint accounts. Seems Mrs. Banks discovered evidence of her husband's extracurricular activities. The revelation that Rebecca had abandoned Trevor was another piece falling into place. Vincent had spent months feeding Rebecca information about her husband's affairs, using anonymous tips and carefully placed evidence to ensure she discovered Trevor's betrayals at the worst possible moment. But Vincent's real masterpiece was just beginning. Over the following week, he orchestrated a campaign of psychological warfare that targeted Diana and Trevor's criminal associates with the precision of a surgical strike. Phase 1 involved releasing carefully edited surveillance footage to federal law enforcement agencies. The recordings showed Trevor discussing weapons trafficking with associates, but they'd been manipulated to make it appear that Diana was present during these conversations. To investigators, it would look like Vincent Riley's wife was an active participant in international arms dealing. Phase 2 was more personal. Vincent began appearing to Diana in places where she thought she was safe: grocery stores, restaurants, her art studio, always just long enough for her to see him before he vanished. To anyone watching, it looked like coincidence. To Diana, it was clear evidence that her husband was stalking her with the skills he'd learned during his military career. The psychological pressure was devastating. Within days, Diana was sleeping poorly, jumping at shadows, and making increasingly erratic decisions that painted her as unstable to anyone observing her behavior. Her pregnancy was making her emotional volatility worse, creating a feedback loop that was destroying her credibility with everyone around her. But Vincent's most brutal move was using Alex as bait. "I need you to call your mother," Vincent told his son one evening in mid-November. They were in the safe house's communications center, surrounded by monitors showing surveillance feeds from around Phoenix. "Tell her you're safe, but that you can't come home because of what you've learned about her affair." Alex looked uncertain for the first time since they'd fled. "Won't that put her in danger?" "She's already in danger. The criminals she's been helping want to eliminate anyone who can connect them to Trevor. That includes her. The only way to protect her now is to make her understand the truth about what she's been involved in." The phone call was devastating to listen to. Diana answered on the first ring, her voice desperate with worry and relief. "Alex, thank God. Where are you? I've been going crazy with worry. I'm safe, Mom. But I can't come home. What do you mean? Where's your father? People are saying he's dangerous, that he might hurt you. Dad's protecting me. From the people you've been helping. The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds before Diana found her voice. I don't understand. What people? Trevor's people, Mom. The criminals he works with. The ones who want to kill Dad because he knows about their weapons trafficking. Vincent listened as Diana tried to process information that shattered everything she thought she knew about her situation. In her mind, Trevor was a successful businessman being persecuted by her unstable husband. The possibility that Trevor was actually a criminal who'd used her to gather intelligence against federal operations was so far outside her reality that she couldn't immediately accept it. That's impossible, Diana said finally. Trevor isn't a criminal. He's being targeted by your father because of our relationship. Mom, I've seen the evidence. Financial records, surveillance footage, communications with arms dealers. Trevor isn't just cheating on his wife. He's helping terrorists get weapons. No, that's not true. Your father is lying to you, manipulating you. Dad didn't tell me about Trevor's criminal activities, Alex interrupted. I discovered them myself. I've been investigating Mom's affair for months, trying to understand why she would destroy our family. What I found was that Trevor Banks has been using her to spy on a man whose job is hunting people exactly like him. The conversation ended with Diana hanging up in denial and rage. But Vincent knew the seeds of doubt had been planted. Over the following days, Diana would begin questioning things she'd accepted without examination, looking for evidence that would either prove or disprove her son's accusations. What she would find would destroy what remained of her carefully constructed fantasy about her relationship with Trevor Banks. Because Vincent had spent months ensuring that the evidence would be impossible to deny, positioned perfectly for her to discover, and devastating enough to shatter every illusion she'd built about the man she thought she loved. The trap was closing, and Diana was about to learn what happened when you betrayed a family that had spent generations perfecting the art of war. Chapter 7. The Noose Tightens. Diana's world began crumbling exactly as Vincent had orchestrated. Within days of Alex's phone call, she discovered evidence that transformed her perception of Trevor from romantic hero to criminal predator. The revelation came through sources she trusted, her own investigation, documents she found accidentally, phone calls she wasn't supposed to overhear. Vincent watched her psychological destruction through surveillance cameras placed throughout their home, which Diana had never discovered. He saw her reading financial records that proved Trevor's criminal connections, listening to recorded phone calls where Trevor discussed eliminating threats with casual brutality, and slowly realizing that her pregnancy had made her a liability to a man who'd never actually loved her. The breaking point came when Diana tried to contact Trevor and discovered his phone numbers were disconnected. Desperate for answers, she drove to his downtown office and found it abandoned, with federal seizure notices taped to the windows. Trevor Banks had disappeared completely, leaving behind a trail of evidence that implicated everyone who'd worked with him, including the pregnant woman who'd been passing him intelligence about federal operations. That evening, Vincent initiated the final phase of his psychological campaign. He sent Diana a package containing photographs of Trevor with other women, financial records proving he'd been lying about his business success, and a letter written in Trevor's handwriting, actually forged by a specialist Vincent had used during psychological operations in Afghanistan. The letter was a masterpiece of manipulation. Diana, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. The situation with your husband has become too dangerous to continue. I need you to understand that our relationship was never about love. It was about accessing information through you that my associates needed for legitimate business purposes. I'm sorry you became emotionally involved, but I can't risk my family's safety for someone who was always just a means to an end. Don't try to contact me. Move on with your life and forget we ever met. Vincent watched through hidden cameras as Diana read the letter, her face cycling through disbelief, rage, and devastating heartbreak. She was 8 months pregnant with a child whose father had just revealed himself to be a criminal who'd used her as an intelligence asset before abandoning her to face consequences he'd helped create. But Diana's suffering was only the beginning. Vincent had spent months positioning chess pieces for this moment, and now he began moving them with the precision of a master strategist. First, He released edited surveillance footage to federal investigators that made Diana appear to be an active participant in Trevor's criminal enterprise. The recordings showed her passing documents to Trevor, discussing Vincent's work in terms that suggested deliberate intelligence gathering, and meeting with Trevor's associates who were actually federal agents conducting undercover operations. Second, he provided evidence that Diana had compromised classified information about federal anti-terrorism operations, putting agents' lives at risk and potentially enabling attacks against American interests. The evidence was circumstantial but devastating. Communication records, financial transactions, and testimony from witnesses who'd been carefully prepared to support the narrative Vincent had constructed. Third, he arranged for Diana to be approached by federal agents who believed she was a willing participant in international arms trafficking. The interview was conducted at her home, in front of neighbors who'd already been primed to expect law enforcement activity through anonymous tips about suspicious behavior from the Riley family. Diana's performance during the federal interview was everything Vincent had hoped for. Stressed, pregnant, and emotionally devastated by Trevor's abandonment, she came across as unstable and potentially dangerous. Her attempts to explain that she'd been deceived only made her sound like a criminal trying to minimize her culpability. Within hours of the interview, Diana was placed under federal surveillance as a person of interest in an ongoing terrorism investigation. Her art studio was searched, her financial records were frozen, and her freedom to travel was restricted pending further investigation. But Vincent's cruelest move was yet to come. Alex made a second phone call to his mother, this one designed to offer her a choice that would reveal her true character. "Mom, I know about the federal investigation," Alex said when Diana answered with a voice that sounded aged by years of stress. "Dad has contacts who are keeping him informed. Alex, please, you have to come home. I need you here. Everything is falling apart. I can't come home while you're under federal surveillance. But Dad says there might be a way to help you." Diana's desperate hope was heartbreaking to witness. "What kind of help?" "Dad has evidence that could prove you were manipulated by Trevor, that you didn't know about his criminal activities. He's willing to share that evidence with federal investigators, but only if you agree to certain conditions." "What conditions?" Alex paused, letting the weight of the moment build. "You have to publicly acknowledge that you betrayed our family. You have to admit that you chose a criminal over your husband and son. And you have to give up all rights to custody or visitation with me." The silence that followed was devastating. Vincent could see Diana through the surveillance cameras, standing in their kitchen with one hand on her pregnant belly, processing an offer that would save her from federal prosecution but destroy her relationship with her son forever. "I can't do that," Diana whispered finally. "Alex, you're my son. I made mistakes, but I love you. I won't give up my rights to see you." "Then you'll go to prison," Alex replied with a coldness that reminded Vincent of his own father. "Dad's evidence is the only thing that can save you from federal charges. But he won't help someone who continues to choose her own selfish desires over her family's well-being." Diana began crying, deep, wrenching sobs that would have moved Vincent if he hadn't spent months watching her betray everything he'd built for their family. "Please don't make me choose between my freedom and my children," Diana begged. "You already made that choice," Alex said quietly, "when you decided to have another man's baby while helping him spy on our family. This is just the consequence of choices you made months ago." The conversation ended with Diana hanging up in despair, leaving her alone in a house filled with surveillance equipment that broadcast her breakdown to the man she'd betrayed and the son she'd lost through her own selfishness. Vincent felt no satisfaction watching his wife's destruction, only the cold completion of a necessary operation. Diana had made herself an enemy of the family when she chose Trevor over Alex. Now she was learning what happened to enemies of people who'd spent decades perfecting the art of warfare. But the endgame was still to come. Trevor Banks was about to discover that disappearing from Diana's life wouldn't save him from the consequences of threatening Vincent's family. And Diana was about to learn that some betrayals were unforgivable, regardless of regret or remorse. The Riley men had always finished what their enemies started. This war was about to end with total victory for the only side that mattered, the one that included Alex, the son who'd chosen loyalty over the comfortable lies that had destroyed his mother. Chapter 8. The Father's Funeral Revelation. After my father's funeral, my mother pulled me aside. She looked terrified. "Your wife?" She visited him the night before he died, she stammered. I froze. Then, my son tugged my sleeve. He whispered, Dad, you need to hide before they come. 2 black SUVs pulled up. My son covered my mouth as we slipped through my father's hidden escape route. This was the moment Vincent had been preparing for since childhood, when his father's lessons about warfare, honor, and loyalty would determine whether his family survived or was destroyed by enemies who'd underestimated them. Hidden in the safe house with Alex, Vincent finally understood the full scope of what his father had discovered before his death. Robert Riley hadn't just uncovered Diana's affair. He'd identified a complex conspiracy that used romantic relationships to infiltrate federal contractors and gather intelligence about anti-terrorism operations. Trevor Banks was part of a criminal network that specifically targeted the wives of men with security clearances, using affairs to gain access to classified information that was then sold to international arms dealers. Diana wasn't Trevor's first target. She was simply the latest in a series of betrayed wives who'd unknowingly compromised national security for the illusion of love. Dad, look at this, Alex said, studying intelligence reports that Robert had compiled before his death. Trevor has been running this operation for 5 years. 12 different women, all married to men with federal contracts or military backgrounds. Vincent examined the files with growing anger. Each case followed the same pattern: extended courtship, emotional manipulation, gradual extraction of intelligence, then abandonment when the targets became liabilities. Several of the women had ended up in federal prison when they couldn't prove their innocence. Others had committed suicide rather than face the consequences of their unintentional treason. Diana was scheduled to be target number 13 in a series that had already destroyed dozens of lives. Grandpa found all this. Alex asked, Your grandfather was still connected to people who track these kinds of operations, Vincent replied. When he discovered your mother's affair, he used those connections to investigate Trevor's background. What he found was evidence of a criminal conspiracy that reaches into several foreign governments. The intelligence Robert had gathered was devastating. Trevor's criminal network wasn't just stealing classified information. They were using it to coordinate terrorist attacks against American interests worldwide. Financial records showed payments from Syrian weapons dealers, Iranian intelligence operatives, and North Korean military contractors. Every secret Diana had revealed about Vincent's work had potentially enabled attacks against American agents, soldiers, and civilians. Her betrayal wasn't just personal. It was treason on a scale that demanded consequences beyond anything Vincent had originally planned. What do we do now? Alex asked. Vincent looked at his son, 16 years old, and already demonstrating more honor and courage than his mother had shown in her entire adult life. Alex deserved to understand the full truth about what they were facing and what would be required to survive it. We're going to destroy them completely, Vincent said quietly. All of them. Trevor, his network, and everyone who helped them target our family. The operation Vincent planned was unlike anything he'd conducted during his military career. This wasn't about gathering intelligence or capturing targets for interrogation. This was about total annihilation of an enemy network that had threatened his family while hiding behind the facade of romantic relationships. Phase 1 involved releasing Robert's intelligence to federal agencies with connections to international counterterrorism operations. Within hours, coordinated raids were conducted across 3 states, resulting in arrests of over 40 people connected to Trevor's network. The evidence Robert had gathered was so comprehensive that most targets were captured before they could destroy incriminating materials or warn associates. Phase 2 was more personal. Vincent used his established Vincent Reynolds identity to arrange a meeting with what remained of Trevor's organization, ostensibly to discuss investment opportunities in their next operation. The meeting location was a warehouse outside Phoenix that Vincent had prepared with surveillance equipment and weapons that would ensure no one left alive. Trevor attended the meeting with 6 associates, believing they were about to recruit a wealthy investor who could help them expand their operations into new markets. Instead, they found themselves facing a man who'd spent 20 years perfecting the art of eliminating threats to American security. Gentlemen, Vincent said as his targets realized the warehouse doors had been sealed and their communications were being jammed, my name is Vincent Riley. You've been trying to kill me for the past month. Tonight, we're going to discuss why that was a mistake. What followed was an interrogation that revealed the full scope of the criminal network Robert had identified. Under pressure that made enhanced interrogation techniques seem gentle, Trevor's associates provided information about operations in 12 countries, planned attacks against federal facilities, and the identities of foreign agents who'd been coordinating with their network. Trevor himself broke after watching Vincent demonstrate exactly what happened to people who threatened federal contractors' families. The psychological pressure of watching his associates systematically eliminated, combined with the realization that Vincent Riley was something far more dangerous than a suburban security consultant, reduced him to a sobbing wreck who confessed to crimes spanning a decade. "Please," Trevor begged as Vincent prepared to implement the final phase of his interrogation. "I'll tell you everything. Every contact, every operation, every target. Just don't kill me." Vincent considered the request with the clinical detachment that had made him effective during classified operations. Trevor Banks possessed information that could save lives and prevent terrorist attacks. But he'd also used Diana to target Vincent's family, putting Alex at risk and contributing to Robert's death through the stress of discovery. "You're going to call Diana," Vincent said finally. "You're going to tell her exactly what you used her for. Then you're going to confess your crimes to federal investigators and provide testimony that will destroy your entire network. And then you'll let me live?" Vincent smiled with an expression that made Trevor understand he was negotiating with someone who'd forgotten more about killing than most people would ever learn about anything. "Then I'll make sure your death is quick instead of lasting the several days I originally planned." The phone call to Diana was recorded and broadcast live to federal agencies monitoring the operation. Trevor's confession, delivered while surrounded by evidence of his associate's fate, was so comprehensive that it implicated criminal networks in 7 countries and provided intelligence that would prevent dozens of planned attacks. Diana listened to Trevor explain how he'd targeted her specifically because her husband's background made her a valuable intelligence asset, how he'd manipulated her emotions to extract classified information, and how he'd planned to abandon her once the baby was born and she became too much of a liability to maintain. "I never loved you," Trevor said, his voice broken by fear and the certainty of his approaching death. "You were just another target in an operation that's been running for years. I'm sorry you got emotionally involved, but this was always about business." The call ended with Diana's world completely shattered. Everything she'd believed about her relationship with Trevor was revealed as elaborate manipulation designed to exploit her vulnerabilities and betray her family. The man she'd loved enough to destroy her marriage was a terrorist operative who'd used her pregnancy as cover for an intelligence operation. As Trevor provided his final testimony to federal investigators, Vincent prepared to fulfill the promise he'd made. But first, he had one more call to make. "Diana, this is Vincent. Alex and I are safe. Trevor won't be contacting you again. The federal investigation will be concluded within the week, and you'll be cleared of all charges. But understand this. Our marriage ended the moment you chose him over our family. You'll never see Alex or me again." Diana's response was everything Vincent had expected: desperate pleas for forgiveness, promises to rebuild their family, desperate attempts to explain her actions in ways that might excuse the inexcusable. "Vincent, please, we can work through this. I was manipulated, I didn't know." "You knew enough," Vincent interrupted. "You knew you were betraying your family every time you met with him. You knew you were risking Alex's safety every time you passed him information about my work. You made your choice. Now live with the consequences." The conversation ended with Diana alone in their house, pregnant with a dead terrorist child, surrounded by the ruins of a life she'd destroyed through her own selfishness. Vincent kept his promise to Trevor. The death was quick and professional, conducted after all useful intelligence had been extracted and recorded. The terrorist who'd targeted the Riley family simply disappeared, along with his associates, leaving behind evidence that would prevent countless attacks while ensuring no one could threaten Vincent's family again. But Vincent's most important work was yet to come, building a new life with Alex, the son who'd chosen loyalty over comfort and deserved better than the family that had failed him. Chapter 9: Blood Runs Deeper. 6 months later, Vincent and Alex stood on the deck of a cabin in the Montana wilderness, watching sunrise paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. The federal investigation had concluded with over 60 arrests across 4 countries, dismantling a terrorist network that had been operating undetected for nearly a decade. Diana had been cleared of all charges, officially classified as an unwitting victim of a sophisticated intelligence operation. Unofficially, she'd given birth to Trevor's son alone in a Phoenix hospital, with no family present and no future beyond the isolated existence she'd created through her choices. "Do you think she'll try to find us?" Alex asked, his voice carrying the maturity that came from surviving betrayal and choosing the harder path of loyalty. "She knows better," Vincent replied. "I made it clear that any attempt to contact us would be viewed as a security threat to be eliminated permanently." The new identities Vincent had created for them were flawless, backed by decades of planning and resources most people couldn't imagine. Vincent Reynolds had officially died in a car accident, while Vincent Riley had disappeared into the Federal Witness Protection Program. The men who now lived in Montana were David and Michael Carson, a widowed father and his son who'd moved to the wilderness to escape the complications of modern life. Alex, now Michael, had adapted to their new existence with remarkable resilience. At 17, he possessed his father's analytical mind and his grandfather's unwavering sense of honor. He'd earned acceptance to several universities under his new identity, but had chosen to defer enrollment to spend time learning skills his father had mastered during his military career. "Dad, I've been thinking about what Grandpa wrote in that letter," Alex said, "about how betrayal demands consequences without mercy or hesitation." Vincent studied his son's expression, recognizing the cold calculation that had defined Riley men for generations. "What about it? Diana got to live. She lost everything, but she's still alive. Same with her son, Trevor's son. Doesn't that violate the principle?" The question revealed depths in Alex that Vincent had hoped would develop more gradually. His son was thinking like a strategist, analyzing the operation's outcome with professional objectivity that would have impressed Vincent's former commanders. "Explain your reasoning." "Diana betrayed our family. Her actions contributed to Grandpa's death and put both of us at risk. The baby she's raising will grow up to be a reminder of that betrayal, potentially seeking revenge against us when he learns the truth about his father's death." Vincent felt pride and concern in equal measure. Alex was demonstrating exactly the kind of tactical thinking that made the Riley family formidable, but he was also revealing a capacity for ruthlessness that needed careful guidance. "You're not wrong," Vincent said carefully, "but there are strategic considerations beyond immediate revenge, such as Diana's continued existence serves our purposes better than her death. She lives every day knowing she destroyed her family for a terrorist who never loved her. She's raising the child of a man she now knows was using her to betray her country. That suffering is more valuable than the satisfaction of killing her." Alex nodded slowly, processing the lesson. Psychological warfare. Precisely. Dead enemies can't suffer. Living enemies who've lost everything they valued serve as examples to others who might consider betraying people like us. They stood in comfortable silence, watching eagles circle the peaks that surrounded their new home. Vincent had chosen this location because it reminded him of Afghanistan, beautiful, isolated, and defensible against any threat that might emerge from their past. "What about college?" Vincent asked. "Are you reconsidering your deferment?" Alex shook his head. "I want to learn everything you can teach me first. Academic knowledge is useful, but I need to understand how to protect what matters when civilized solutions aren't sufficient." The decision pleased Vincent more than he'd expected. Alex was choosing to follow the path that had defined Riley men for generations, preparing for wars that others hoped would never come, developing capabilities that peaceful people couldn't imagine needing. "It won't be easy," Vincent warned. "The training I'll give you goes beyond anything taught in military schools. You'll learn things that will change how you see the world permanently." "I understand. But after what we've been through, I can't imagine living like normal people who trust that others will protect them." Diana trusted that you would never discover her affair. Trevor trusted that his criminal network would protect him from consequences. Both of them learned what happens when you underestimate people who've prepared for war. That evening, Vincent began Alex's education in earnest. They started with surveillance detection, counterintelligence techniques, and psychological operations that would enable Alex to identify and neutralize threats before they could damage whatever family he eventually built. But Vincent's most important lesson came through a phone call they monitored from Diana's home in Phoenix. Diana was talking to her mother, describing the isolation and depression that had consumed her life since Trevor's disappearance and Vincent's abandonment. She was struggling to raise Trevor's son alone, facing financial difficulties and social ostracism from people who'd learned about her affair and its consequences. "I destroyed everything good in my life for a man who was using me," Diana said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute hopelessness. "Vincent and Alex were the best parts of my world, and I threw them away for someone who was planning to betray our country." Alex listened to his mother's suffering with an expression of cold satisfaction that reminded Vincent powerfully of his own father. "She deserves worse," Alex said when the call ended. "Perhaps, but she's also served her purpose. Diana's destruction is complete, and her existence no longer threatens us." Sometimes the most effective revenge is simply allowing enemies to live with the consequences of their choices. And if she tries to rebuild her life, finds happiness again, Vincent smiled with an expression that carried hints of the violence he'd learned to hide. "Then we'll remind her why that's not permitted. But I doubt it will be necessary. Some betrayals destroy people from the inside. Diana will never escape what she did to her family." As they prepared for bed in their mountain fortress, Vincent felt a satisfaction deeper than anything he'd experienced during his military career. He'd protected Alex from the consequences of Diana's betrayal, eliminated threats to their family's security, and ensured that betrayers paid appropriate prices for their treachery. More importantly, he'd raised a son who understood that loyalty was earned through shared sacrifice, and that some principles were worth more than comfort, security, or the approval of people who'd never faced real tests of character. The Riley family had survived another war, stronger and more dangerous than before. Alex would carry forward lessons that would protect whatever family he eventually built, ensuring that future generations would never be vulnerable to the kind of betrayal that had almost destroyed them. Diana could keep Trevor's son as a reminder of her choices. Vincent had something far more valuable, a son who'd chosen honor over comfort and would never forgive those who threatened what mattered most. In the end, blood truly did run deeper than any other loyalty. And the Riley blood had been tested by betrayal, purified by warfare, and proven stronger than anything their enemies could bring against them. The war was over. The right side had won. Everything else was just consequence management for people who'd learned too late what it meant to betray a family that had spent generations perfecting the art of permanent victory.